I see a lot of young instructors who have kind of come up in the day and age of TrackMan and force plates and 3D systems and all that. And I perpetuated that with some of my other friends on tour, my good friend Mark Blackburn and other guys like that, where we wanted to not guess. If we could measure, then why guess? I just don't see the benefit of doing that, because there's a lot on the line when you're working with top players and even just your club players. So, I mean, the look on some people's eyes when they finally figure it out and hit that shot, to me, is why I do it. It doesn't matter. They could be a billionaire and it's still something they've never been able to do. So I think we have a responsibility as professionals to know what's going on with the time and where the game's going. And I've got a list of people that I've learned from that I want to share with you, and you can write it down in your notes. And so nothing I'm going to tell you is original. Everything that I'm going to tell you is something I've learned from someone else. What's really cool is my first golf instructor ever, Greg McHatton, is sitting right there. Right? And so when Bill McKinney contacted me and told me that Greg was going to be here, that was pretty cool, because I was 10 years of age. My dad took me to the range and we hit some balls and I liked it right away. And then I had went to Vista Valencia to do some things, picking the range and be in the junior program with Jason Gore. And then my dad had got me lessons at Valencia with the pro. So it's kind of cool. Like, it all started for me in Southern California. My dad worked for DuPont, so we moved around a lot. So I do want to talk about the golf swing, but it's a tricky thing to discuss. When I sat down and Jamie invited me to do this, I sat down and, okay, this is the golf swing to me. But as I started writing about, like, the takeaway that I like, then I was like, well, what if they can't retract their scap, and if they can't protract their lead shoulder? So as I kept writing, I just kept scribbling everything out and then scribbling everything out. Whereas 20 years ago, I would have given you a detailed position to position to position of what's right. In the time that's ensued with everything I've learned, I've realized that there's principles that all good hitters are adhering to, but we can sometimes get consumed with style and preference. And so we'll get to that. The first part, though, I think as a coach, as a human being, is I've struggled over the years sometimes, one as a player, but two as a coach, with the idea of a lot of sports psychology to an extent. They say we play our best golf when we're happy, when we believe in ourselves, when we're secure in ourselves, when we're thinking good thoughts. But in my experience, I don't believe that, because I've seen players who the commentator is saying they're in the zone. You can see that they're right where they want to be. They know how this is going to end. Whereas that player's laughing going down the fairway. And then when I asked him what they're laughing about, he said, man, I can't believe I wore white pants because I was going to shoot myself. So it's when you see another example is Zach Johnson. So the Tuesday of St. Andrews, Zach is sitting in the rain outside the clubhouse and he's totally frustrated. So I said, well, what's going on, Zach? He goes, I can't play this course. He's like, I just played with Dustin Johnson. He took it over these bunkers. I can't even reach the green in two. And what am I even doing here? And he won the tournament on Sunday. So I've seen that. I've seen so many players ready to withdraw who ended up shooting 32 on the back nine to win. So when you start seeing, once again, an unprincipled view, if the key to being successful is having self-belief and being positive and being happy, then I just don't know if I've met many people who are successful who are those things. I think a lot of people are driven to success through insecurity. So that's what I'm going to try to clarify a little bit. The things that I use in my coaching, the things that I've used in my life to empower myself and hopefully empower the people around me. As the pro was saying, he was talking about inspiration, education, and entertainment, and I couldn't agree more with that, with that idea. But I think it has to start with yourself. It's difficult to pass love on to someone if you don't have it for yourself. And I think if you look at the world as a whole, every issue we have in the world right now is under this umbrella where the only thing missing in all of those situations is love. I mean, that's just the thing that ties it all together. And I'm kind of known for hugging my guys and all that stuff, but that's kind of what it is. To me, that there's nothing more powerful in the world than love. Love is the first thing we feel when we're born. So when they put us in our mother's arms, That's the first real thing that we ever do. So to me, everything after that is taught. So if the world was being run by 4-year-olds, we wouldn't have any of these problems. These are just educated adults who are misappropriating the direction and the places we need to be. So starting with that, this was a question that was asked to me a long time ago, and the question was, where does our experience come from? And so at that point, I believed that my experience was an effect of my situation, my circumstance, how people treated me, how they made me feel. And, that kid, 23 years ago, I'm sad and glad to admit it, but, I never tried it, but suicide was thought about a lot. Like, I had a lot of problems. And I think where this has all come from is trying to understand, how does a kid with great parents who gave him every opportunity end up in such a dark place? And so that's why when I work with young kids, this is most of the lesson, is getting them to recognize this, getting them to look at the great people of time and what they did. And what they did is, they weren't the happiest people, but they were the people who could endure the most pain, for sure. They stayed curious, and they led from behind. So it wasn't really a function of how I'm sure Mandela wasn't very happy sitting in a jail cell for 25 years. But that jail cell was really necessary for him understanding where true peace came from. And so when you see a man like that who recognized, at the original speech that he gave, they put the 3 prison guards in the front row. And so these guys had violently beat him. They'd just done everything to him. And he said to them, he hugged them and told them that he understood why they did what they did and that he loved them. And they said, how can you be that way? How can you not want to redeem that or vindicate how you were treated? And he said that a man drinks poison and thinks he's going to make the other man sick. And so that's the type of stuff that inspires me. That's the type of stuff that I look at when I was coaching Tiger. It was like everyday constant criticism. And I recognize that. It was always going to be that way. But when people said, how were you not affected by it, is because I recognize where my feelings stem from. So it can't come from outside of me. So on the idea of my experience is coming from my mindset at a given moment, my thought process at a given moment, and just my overall awareness at any moment. So human beings have innate ability. Just look at a 2-year-old kid and all the things they've learned before they can even understand language. So it's incredible that we're actually learning experts as human beings, and we learn from making mistakes. My friend Fran Pirazzolo is a neuropsychologist who talks about the importance to inconsistency and variability when you practice. So people always say to me they want to be more consistent, but the science points to the fact that we can ingrain better patterns through inconsistency. And it's tough to be consistent at golf because every day is so different. Our body's different. The wind conditions are different. So if we're chasing consistency, we're probably going to typically be frustrated. So I've drawn this, I just call this kind of the roller coaster of life and awareness. So from here, my wife is charming, and from here, I find her annoying. Okay? From here, I have empathy for my member who's complaining about things that you shouldn't complain about if you're a member at a great golf course. And from here, I'm frustrated by what he's saying. From here, I give a homeless guy $10. From here, I tell him to get a job. From here, I'm in traffic, and it gives me time to reflect and call my mom and tell her how grateful I am for her. And from here, I'm punching the steering wheel. So, and people laugh because they're like, oh man, yeah. Trust me, when I first heard this, I almost fainted, okay? So I was at this thing, and I went to see this therapist because I was really struggling. And he said, what do you think your biggest problem is? And I said, I'm just really, really insecure. And he goes, well, you're not, but you think you are, so take it for what that means. And the room went white, and for 5 seconds I blanked out. And when I walked out of that office, it was like a different day because I understood for the first time in my life that I was only feeling my own thinking. So when I thought it was that girl making me feel this way or my parents making me feel this way, in order for me to have a good day, all these things I don't control, which is everything, including my thinking, they had to all be perfect. Well, that's a tough way to live. That's a really tough way to live. And we all go through it. There's not anybody here who's not gone through the same things. And so for me, this awareness and this consciousness was, we go back to the principle, There's 117 elements on the element chart, but they comprise every single substance organically in the planet. There's 3 primary colors that create every other color. So when it comes down to the mind and it comes down to the golf swing, I like to think of the principles, and the principles are foundations of truths. These are things that aren't based on opinion or preference. It's factual. So for example, every time I drop something for the rest of my life, it's going to hit the ground because of gravity. But the tricky part about thought is it mirrors gravity in the sense that it's formless and you can't see it. And people can explain it mathematically on how it occurs. And so I always wanted to, when I was going through all these struggles as a young man, I was the guy who went to the self-help store and just read every book. So the 17 steps to spiritual healing, the 10 steps to happiness. I'm like, why is there so many steps? Right? Like I'd look at a 5-year-old and be like, man, he doesn't even know how to read. And he's like, looks amazing every day. Right? I mean, as long as they're fed and they've slept, they pretty much are having a great experience. Well, that's still in us. So we don't need to apply tools to get back to a place that we are. That's just what we are. We have to peel the onion back. We don't have to add anything. So I see all my junior golfers who are, one of my kids is a kid named Cameron Champ, who's about to turn pro soon. And he's from Sacramento. And he lost the tournament. And his college coach said, so what do you think it was? Were you nervous? Yeah, I was really nervous. Okay, well, we got to talk about that. And so I said to Cameron, well, when you won this other tournament, were you nervous? He's like, I couldn't feel my hand for the last hour. He goes, I was so nervous. And he goes, but I've been taught that there's good nerves and bad nerves. That's such a bad narrative to get a kid thinking about. Because the thing is, we're creating narratives, and then what happens is when we create a narrative, we create an expectation of everything we're seeing and creating. So we're stuck in that narrative now. It can't be anything different. So, telling a kid who doesn't win a tournament everything happens for a reason, I don't think 5-year-olds get leukemia for a reason. I challenge that thought process. I don't agree with that at all. It's just life is a difficult place, and as long as we understand that we're born like this is how we're born. We're a blue sky. So what I know now is when it's overcast, it's still blue above. And when it feels like the world's caving in around me and on me, I've come to learn now that it just feels that way, and that if I just keep putting one foot in front of the other, at some point that's going to lift and it'll be back to being clear again. So that's what we have. And if you have young kids or you work with young kids, you see how they just go like this. I mean, my son will tell me he loves me and hates me in the same hour. But I'm trying to get them to understand, like, if you're in your room, it's because you made the wrong decision and you made the wrong choice. And so as you move down the line, we look at intellect versus intelligence. So intelligence is that thing that is in us, call it the life force, that I've never told my heart to beat in my life. It's beat every single day, nonstop. I've never told my liver to detoxify my system. That's just what it does. When I get cut, I grow a scab. We're abundantly incredible. Like, that's what I want people to understand. So we have an immune system that's fighting off thousands of viruses as we speak. So I think in our soul we have the same thing. And that's why I don't really agree with tools on when you do this, this, and this. Look, when the world when the world looks terrible to me, it's because of thinking. I don't think more thinking helps. Okay, so positive thinking, for example, is more thinking. So when I was working with a player and sports psychologist, and they said, we need to get them to be more clear and understand the importance of clarity and trusting their intuition, their subconscious. But he needs to be more positive. And I'm like, that's just more thinking. Like, I don't have to be positive. I'm positive a lot, and then sometimes I'm negative. And if you told me when I was being negative to be positive, I'd tell you where to go. So when you're in a bad mood and someone goes, just cheer up. I mean, who wants to hear that? Right? No one wants to hear that. I don't want to be in this mood, right? So we're born in an abundance of a good mood. But what happens is the brain starts to evolve. So yes, we're spiritual. Yes, we're biological. I mean, we're Homo sapiens. You know, it's amazing how the discussion's always about race when race is not a fact. It's just an idea. The fact is we're Homo sapiens. So when you look at that, as the prefrontal cortex starts to grow, as kids, you know, we're very limbic. We're like chimps. We're like little chimps. And we do have primate brains. I mean, that's part of it. So I think to really understand the principles behind why we are and who we are the way we are, we have to recognize that we have to look at how the brain evolved. We have to look at how the universe evolved. All these different things to get to an understanding where we can help people. Because what I'm seeing is, I'm seeing friends who've gone to the same therapist for 3 years and they talk about things that happened when they were 10. And I'm like, that doesn't even count anymore. I mean, if you have a good understanding, you shouldn't have to pay a therapist for 3 years in a row. You know, and they always go back to that time. It's fascinating to me. So intellect is the thought process we have. Intelligence is just that thing we're born with, just that total intelligence. So the intellect is trying to figure things out. The intellect's trying to protect us from shame and guilt and fear and doubt. Fear is in our DNA. Fear is okay. It's so okay to have fear. Because years ago, our ancestors, a guy went hunting, went around the forest, didn't come back. The next day, 2 guys went out. One came back with 1 arm and said, hey, there's saber-toothed tigers over there. We can't go that way. We have to go this way. So I think when we hear things like play fearless golf, it's just not fair to us. What you need to do is just realize that there's nothing wrong with you if you're nervous or if you have fear. It's pre-programmed in your DNA. So it's okay. And once you realize, like, oh, so it's okay to be like that, then you don't think something's wrong with you. I mean, how many times I've had students say, what do you think's wrong with me? And my answer's simple. What's wrong with you is that you think something is wrong with you. You're just living this experience and you're misinterpreting it a little bit in what you're seeing. So I think the people who had deep consciousness and enlightenment, like Jesus and the Buddha and those types of individuals, they realized this before anybody else. And that's where their enlightenment came from. Their enlightenment came from the fact that they didn't suffer anymore. So pain is something that we're always going to have to deal with. There's no way around it. But suffering is more of a choice. And I don't mean physically, like if someone has cancer or they get really sick. I'm just talking about in here. So pain is the fact that my guys are, you know, painful moment this year is when Justin Rose lost in the playoff in the Masters. I cried for like 3 days. I'm not going to lie to you. Right? My wife told my kids, just stay away from dad for a few days, right? But I knew I had to do that. Because what I would have done in the past from all of my 11-step books to happiness, I'd have been like, it's okay, it doesn't matter, I'm lucky, like, I'm fortunate, people are starving, you know. Yeah. But inside, I'm just so hurt. But for him, 95% of the pain was for him. Especially how it went down. And how it always goes down. It's just tough. I mean, it's, you know, Sergio Garcia is a great player. But I think what was interesting was listening to people after saying, I thought your boy had it because Sergio was just pulling a Sergio. And I'm like, what do you mean pulling a Sergio? He's made like $50 million on a golf course. So he's a pretty good golfer. So when he hooked it on 10, or pushed it on 10, hooked it on 11, and then hooked it on 13, everyone's like, your boy's got this. He hasn't missed a shot in 3 hours. And I was like, yeah, we'll see. And they're like, so you're not excited? I'm like, I learned a long time ago, I'm only going to fall as low as I climb high. So this is going to hurt, however it turns out, or it's going to be great. But I'm the person who really puts the limit on how much it hurts or how great it feels. You know, and I think that's important. You're standing in the fairway on 13, guy's looking for his ball. You've got 6 iron in, you're standing in the middle of the fairway. It's a perfect day. It's exactly where you've always wanted to be. It's pretty easy to think, I make birdie, he makes bogey, 4-stroke lead, it's on. I'm watching it in the airport thinking, I have to imagine that Sergio's going to hole out for 4. I have to go there because I know what's going to occur if I start getting super excited. Now I'm not crying for 3 days. I'm like completely despondent for 2 months. So it's okay. Like that's, to me, the pain that I felt, I was good with it because it shows that I'm still concerned and that I still really love this and I still really want to help my guys as much as I can. So when we get to circumstance and situation, intellect is the guy who says, what was that guy's name? Oh man, it's on the tip of my tongue. The intelligence is in the shower later when you go, oh, Bruce Colburn. So we always know the answer, that we just put so much on top of that genius that we are, that it becomes difficult to decipher. And, the school systems create a large amount of intellect. I did a thing in the school system in Orlando where I created a chart to get kids to understand how the world is generated through their mood. So there's this discussion about bullying that is rampant, and I think bullying's been there from day one. I just thought it was like a fact of life on a daily basis. I don't think I ever went home and told my mom and dad I was being bullied. I just kind of accepted, like, I guess hurt people. So, this guy is in a bad spot. But ideally, when we put the chart up, so there was the kids who were kind of serial bullies and the kids who were kind of seriously interrupted the class, and we'd say they have this, and then we give them pills that they don't need. It's all just it's such a sham. So when I put up for the kids their names and then their mood, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 was the worst mood ever, and 1 was the best mood ever. So the kids who were bullies noticed, like, really soon, they never bullied from 1 or 2. They only bullied from 4 or 5. And then the other kids who thought the teacher picked on them, they never picked on them from 1 or 2. They only picked on them for 4 or 5. When some of the kids were insecure that they weren't as good as student, and that drove them to be unkind to the kid who was a good student, call him a nerd, call him whatever, a geek, they never did that from 1 or 2. They only did it for 4 or 5. And that's why I'm saying underneath that, with circumstance and situation, is getting people to recognize that circumstance and situation has no effect on you. Because if it did, so if my circumstance made me feel a certain way, then every time I'm in that circumstance, I should feel that way. So going back to my roller coaster, MIT says 95% of human behavior is automated. So when my wife's being annoying and charming, she can't be either. She's always being who she is. It's just sometimes I find it charming, sometimes I find it annoying. And people are like, why do you find it annoying? You had a tough day, yeah? Like, I guess, but that's not it. It's just where I'm at. So what I know, how this helps me in my coaching, how this helps me in my life and in my relationships and interactions, which are the most important thing we have as people, is one, I never take anything personally because I know someone who's being that way to me are misunderstanding this as well. And that's a great way to be, especially when I took everything personally, right? And that led me into a much different reality. And the good thing about reality is you just have to understand it's not permanent. It's impermanent. So a guy's reality is that he can't hit the ball. Well, 2 weeks later, he might figure something out and play great. So you can't get too caught up in that moment. And you just have to know that each day is an opportunity for that inner genius to come out and help guide you where you need to go. That's what's guiding us. But we've become so goal and so plan oriented. So Justin Thomas wrote down his goals, and it's really cool on Instagram after he's achieved them. But I'm sure every time he wrote down goals, he didn't achieve them. So when people say writing goals down is the key to success, well, everyone who writes goals down don't necessarily achieve that. So if a goal was a key to success, then everyone using a goal would be successful. It just doesn't really work out like that. Success is a crazy thing. If Bill Gates was born 7 months later, we would never known who he was because someone would have, in that window of time, they would have figured out what he figured out. So there's so much luck in everything that happens and goes into it. So with that being said, and we all know this term, I mean, we've probably said it, each of us probably said it 1,000,000 times. And when I hear it from my clients, I know I'm not teaching them. I don't really teach them. I'm trying to help guide them. I can't take it from the range to the course. Right? And so I've got kids who they get pretty in their head thinking like they've got a mental problem or a mental issue. And that's really the start of it because they're generating something that's not true, but it becomes true to them. So if I can't take it from the range to the course, we started doing a thing at my academy up in Timaquan at the Foley Performance Academy where we started measuring practice sessions. And so we'd give a kid like, okay, you got to hit this 160. And we have bunkers on the range, so it helps. And so we'd have them hit 5 8-irons, or some of them hit wedges. It's crazy how far they hit it. And, they would be sitting there hitting it and twirling it. But when we measured the distance on TrackMan and everything, they were coming up, 30, 40 feet short. They'd been plugged in the front lip, but they're out there twirling it. But it's the fact because there's no direct consequence of their action that they don't realize it. So the problem with practice is it gives us a kind of a elevated, it makes our skill set look better than it actually is. And so the problem with that is that our perception is that we're better than we are, and then when we go play golf, because I don't see anyone hit out of a divot with a 3-iron on the range, and then you hit the best drive of the day and you're in the divot with a 3-iron, and my kids are trying to hit high cuts downwind out of a divot with a 3-iron. They're not making double because they have a bad swing. They're making double because they don't really understand that that shot requires enough thought and care to be, where do I need to play this next shot from? And I think that's what the great players do. I think that, Jim Furyk, Jordan Spieth, these guys, I mean, they start the round out with 15 cents. They have $1 after it all the time. But there's plenty of guys who start with $1 and end up with 15 cents. So when you see someone like Jim Furyk and you kind of watch it and it's so different, you wonder, how's this guy fourth on the all-time money list? Is because he sees himself as a business and he doesn't make wrong business ideas. So, for example, the PGA Tour is full of guys who have hit 16 greens and go back to the range and just can't see they had 34 putts. Right? And it's also full of guys who go to where they're good at. I mean, it's nice to be, if I could drive it like Hunter Mahan, I'd stand on the range and hit drivers all day. Because everyone would come up to me and go, man, you drive it so good. I wish I could drive it like that. So you can see how it's easy to kind of fall into that without really realizing that it's occurring. So when I started thinking about, when I'm losing sleep over how my kids were performing, I'm thinking about practice versus play. And what does practice mean? So two things. Bruce Lee said, I don't fear the man who has 10,000 kicks. I fear the man who's made the same kick 10,000 times. So I think over the years, the idea of like block and variable practice and, go on the range and pretend you're on the course, and kind of difficult to trick your brain that that's the case. It is just difficult to trick your brain that that's the case. So the Navy SEALs, there's roughly 600 to 700 of them. They shoot more rounds in 1 year than the whole Marine Corps, which is 250,000 men. So the reason they're the best shot is because they shoot the most. The difficulty, so they start on their belly and they shoot. And as they move on, they are now shooting from a helicopter that's going 100 miles an hour as it's turning, and they're shooting someone on a boat that's going up and down on the... So you have to be able to do it somewhere first. So I think when we're on the range, you can split it up into what's your blueprint. So with my players, because it feels different every day and because we're human beings and we're not always aware of our experience and where it's coming from, you could feel like you're making a different swing every day, so there's got to be a different fix. So the one thing I use with my players is I use Mark Bull from England, who does 3D. And if we 3D someone 10 years ago and we 3D them now, they still have a lot of the same patterns of movement. Because the original learning, everyone always says when I hit a ball, and I'm not that good, I'm a 3 handicap, but they say you make a great sound. Well, my first coach was Greg McCatton. He makes one of the loudest sounds I've ever heard because he taught me how to get to impact and how to move from right to left and all those things. So I didn't even know there was another way to swing a club except to have shaft lean at impact and be using my body to get the club out of the ground. That's all I was taught. So it's kind of is interesting as you move on that, you know what, hon? That's probably cool. I don't really need that anymore. Let me do this. Thank you. So there's nothing wrong with sitting on the range and working on your blueprint. So with Justin Rose, my blueprint is different than Siwoo Kim. With Siwoo Kim, my blueprint is different than Danny Willett. So Danny Willett has the strongest grip of anyone I've ever coached, and Siwoo has the weakest grip of anyone I've ever coached. And so I don't even ask them if they want to change their grip, because I think at this point, that's just not going to happen. At my club, working with my friends and amateurs, I'll do that right away. But with these pros who've had this like this for so long or this for so long, and that has a connection to how they apply force to the club and when they release the club, and then their window, you got to be so careful with that. So the reason you want to understand the principles of the things that you can do is because I can get them both to hit it pretty straight, but they're going to have completely different. So Danny Willett, top's going to have cup in his left wrist, and I have to get Siwoo to go Dustin Johnson as much as he can, because I have to find a way to take loft off the club, and I have to find a way to square the club. because when his arms start kicking out at the start of the transition, that's going to open the face even more. So when I was lucky that Siwoo tried, after he won his first tournament on the PGA Tour, I was fortunate for my business that he went home and tried to get his backswing to look like Adam Scott, because he didn't like that it was across the line. He didn't like how it looked on television. That's a true story, right? That's an absolute true story, right? And look, I've been that guy, and we've all taught people who they hit the ball so much better, then we show them a video and they just get so discontent and they're like, well, I just don't like the way it looks. But really, it's about how the ball looks. So we're not really suffering from positivity and things like that. It's more like vanity and things that we are directly struggling with. I don't like my backswing. Well, backswing is basically a system in the body where you're trying to passively load tissue, right? You're trying to create a summation of force in the ground, and you're trying to get that club into a transition point where within 2/100ths of a second is going to be in a pretty good place at impact. So for some guys, that's long and across the line. For some guys, it's laid off and short. So what I do know is you can't be across the line and short, and you can't be long and laid off. And we'll discuss that a little bit more. But when it comes to games that ensure competence and intuitive learning, one of the most important quotes that I ever read as far as my career goes is from Bruce Lee. I love Bruce Lee, by the way. I think that guy was one of a kind. And Bruce Lee says, a good teacher can never be fixed in a routine. Each moment requires a sensitive mind that is constantly adapting and changing. A teacher must never impose this student his favorite pattern. A good teacher protects his pupils from his own influence. A teacher is never a giver of truth. He or she is a guide or a pointer to the truth that each student must find for himself. So when I first started coaching, I was the opposite of this. It was like, this to me was the swing. So if I did this 10 years ago or even 20 years ago, it would be really easy to talk about the swing, because I would say, okay, here you got to be here, here you got to be here, here you got to be here. But as you keep your eyes open and you look around at people who are good at it, you're like, well, he's not there. So I've been fortunate to have a mind that when I would see Jim Furyk, when I first worked at John Jacobs Golf Schools, and there was 10 instructors, it was all of us, I was 22 years old, yeah, they'd make fun of Jim Furyk's swing. But then I'd see him at the Canadian Open hitting balls, and like no one hit it straighter than that guy. So as I started saying, like, why does it work rather than why doesn't it work? So when they just say, well, he's just really talented, when you see him in person, he doesn't look like a real athlete. I mean, you see Dustin Johnson, you're like, okay, I get it, right? You see Gary Woodland, you're like, oh, I get it. It's interesting that the two longest hitters on tour can do the most different slam dunks. So I think athleticism helps a little bit in today's game. But this is the key. So for me, my preference is like Tommy Fleetwood. So I love how he's kyphotic at the top of his back. I love how he takes it back and he stands it up slightly. And then from there, I love how the club shallows. I love how he reflexes, and I love how he goes around the corner. But I got a lot of guys that I coach that if I did that to, one, I would hurt, and two, they'd never hit the golf ball properly. So I'm so careful, like, just because that's my favorite preference, just because, say, I like Indian Vindaloo doesn't mean I'm going to take everyone out for an Indian Vindaloo. You got to be careful with that. So I find a lot of times when I listen to instructors, wherever I go, whether it's on the tour, this or that, sometimes they're teaching someone something that they think is the reason they didn't make it. So they're standing on the range and their pattern is all push draws, or all pull cuts, or all low shots, or all high shots. I think it's important to understand the principles of, okay, Siwoo Kim is hitting 8 balls out of bounds per round. How can we stop that right away? So everyone's saying it's mental. I'm looking at a club face that's 120 degrees open to the arc at about at left arm parallel. So I don't care how good you are. That ball is going to go out of bounds a few times. There's no doubt. And then it becomes mental at that point. But the difficulty, what happens on tour, is a guy starts to struggle, and then they start changing some things. And I know that this happens because I've done it. So like I said, I've made every mistake in the book. So we're like, well, let's go look at videos from 2011. Right? We do this a lot. It's crazy. I'm punching myself in the face right now. Okay? So we go to 2011, and you look, and you're like, man, he's like 15 pounds heavier. He's 5 years older. We practice about 20% of the time that we used to because he's got 2 kids. I don't think this is helpful. Well, I'm just going to go back to that feel, and we hit snap hooks. When we had that feel before, it was just like a little cut. And like the young kids in the crowd in the crowd here understand that too. You got a feel that you run with for about 2 weeks, and then you keep searching for that feel again. But it's kind of elusive. It's not there anymore. So when it comes down to playing the game, the best way that I've seen, and I learned this from studying special forces groups around the world. So the Unit 16 in Israel, the Navy SEALs, SAS, SBS. I want to know what makes these guys special, like warriors. Because I've met a few of them, and they don't look a whole lot different than me. You kind of picture like Ivan Drago in Rocky, but they don't look like that. I've met a lot of Marines who look like that, but not a lot of these special forces operatives. So as I was researching that, I found out that from 2012 to 2017, that more Navy SEALs died at Coronado than died at war. So more of these warriors died in training than died at war. And how do we look at training? We stand with our favorite club on the range. We go into like if I give kids, we have double-ended range. The really good kids go straight into the wind, and the kids who are a little less, aren't as good, they go where it's downwind. Because downwind makes it look like it's flying straighter and better, whereas the good kids understand I'm getting more feedback from mishits into the wind. So it's an interesting thing. So these guys are special warriors because of their training and how they're trained. So they train them into a way where they're put into the position that they're going to be when they're at war, so they're fine with it. They're probably still nervous. They probably still want to see their family, but they just trust their training and go through the moves, whereas I don't think we train that well. A lot of times I'm standing on the range at a major or tour event, and I'm just praying that he hits it good because I don't know. I can't see anything. I'm freaking out, and I'm just like, please hit this next one good. Please hit this next one good. Right? And then he says, well, what do you think's going on? Like, what do you think I should do? And I'm like, well, we're tied for the lead after 3 rounds, so you should probably just keep doing what you're doing. Okay, yeah, that's good. Yeah, let's do that. Right? Let's do that. So I've had some very interesting. If you ever see me on the range with my phone, because unfortunately, what I love about doing this is you get to hear me, see me, meet me, talk to me during the day. I get to listen to my other friends and learn from them. Is like the TrackMan's always on, and my phone's always in my hand. And so when you see me going up like this, a lot of times I'm just showing like pictures of my kids or like football plays they did. Or there was a great one time. Brandel Chambly was. Who I've actually we've mended and we're friendly now. I'd never really met him till 2 months ago, so it was interesting, anyways. But I'm on the range with Tiger at the Masters, and we're kind of like in an argument, and I'm not arguing. We're just talking, and so I get home, and my dad and my brother were staying with me in Augusta. They like look like they've seen a ghost, and they're like, "What was that about on the range?" I'm like, you were there?" They're like, "No, they just showed the whole range session on the Golf Channel." I go, well, "What did they say?" He said, "Well, they said that they was tired of all the mechanics and all the science, and he just wants to play now." And I go, "Well, I said that A-Rod was a better athlete without steroids than Derek Jeter." So it's sometimes funny. Like sometimes I can't watch TV anymore because you go through something and you experience and you see the reality of it, and then you go home and listen to them talk about it, and you're like, that was not going on. That was not happening. So it's unfortunate that everyone's connection to that is through that, but these are the things that give me the opportunity to kind of set it straight. So with the games that I get my kids to do, and I do this all the way at tour level, especially when players are slumping. So typically a guy starts playing bad. The next thing that he wants to do is work harder at it. But the problem is that we do testing with our players where we test cortisol levels and testosterone levels. So a lot of times when guys are really playing poorly, those levels are not even close to regulated. So they're more stressed out with less testosterone. So that's not really a powerful place to start to play golf from. So when we test this way, what it does, we might just say, hey, you need to take a week off, otherwise. But it's like it's on fire and you have gasoline and it looks wet and the house is burning down and it's like it's wet. poof, and then the whole house goes up. So just because it's wet doesn't mean it's going to put the fire out, right? It's going to typically do more to it. So with the games, as we go back to the blueprint, we start struggling, we'll use 3D. A lot of the times we find all the issues are in their setup. And after flying to Dubai and then back from Dubai and then outing to New York City and then here, and here, their bodies aren't the same and they don't stand the same. So standing is a fundamental, but when you look at it through 3D, it's like, wow, standing is like really hard to do the same all the time. And if you look at the players on tour, I mean, they're great because of asymmetries. So there's treatments where people are trying to create symmetry through the body, but I mean, if you did that to a senior tour player who stands like this all the time because he's been standing like this his whole life, if you made him go back to here, he's probably going to lose his function and his feeling for where the club is. So that's the one thing, is to really focus on the blueprint. That keeps us kind of centered. So my blueprint with Justin Rose is that he gets way too much interior tilt in his setup. He gets too out over his toes. From there, he takes it back with a twist. And then because he's not really pivoting properly, he'll pick it up and he'll cup his left wrist. So as soon as he feels the face open, he'll get ahead of it quickly and then hang back. And he does that because he knows if he does this and then that it'll close the face for him. But the problem is it puts a lot of stress on the lower right side, on the neck, on the shoulder, and everything like that. So we're always... He can play with a little bit of extension his left wrist. I mean, everyone doesn't have to be bowed. I know that's like the new thing, right? I mean, it's not really the new thing if you look back to like Trevino and all those guys, right? And George Knudson and those guys. But you can be this way. I mean, if you use your shoulders and you use your pivot and you generate force in an efficient way, I mean, that's going to happen to your wrist, and that one's going to go more that way in transition. Now, I would say with amateurs, I don't mind that, because they don't necessarily biomechanically move the right way to make the shoulder move the right way. So they need something to help them have the face maybe slightly more closed and in a stronger position before they begin. But on tour, you'll see a lot of players with their left wrist like that. And some instructors will say, well, they can do that. It's wrong, but they can do it because they're talented. That's not the case. I mean, if you watch what all these PGA Tour players go through to become great players, someone that talented wouldn't have to work that hard to be good at it. Right? So I don't like the word talent. I think it's such a cop-out. I think it creates such an overwhelming sense of mediocrity everywhere just to think, oh, that guy's talented. You know, Michael Phelps, his disadvantage was that as a kid he was bullied. He kind of had funny ears. He had funny teeth. He spoke with a stutter. So when he was at the pool, that was like his safe haven. So with 3 hours left of swimming, Michael Phelps is thinking, I don't believe I have to get out of the pool. And the other guys who are really good are thinking, I have that 3 hours left. So it's kind of interesting. If Michael Phelps didn't have that disadvantage, would we ever have the greatest gold medalist ever? So I think it's, we don't really know till we find out later what's really happening and interpreting. So when you get into the game playing with the kids, when they can't take it to the course, I do a bunch of different games with them. So we use 4 clubs, one for 9 holes. And on the back 9, we play the back tees with no woods. The next day, we'll play worst ball for 18 holes. So you hit 2 balls, pick the worst one, hit 2 from there, pick the worst one, and on you go. And what the kids say is it helps them get better at being frustrated. And you have to be, it's okay with being frustrated. You just got to understand there's a way to deal with it. But they do say, I start to feel, even if I'm out by myself, coach, and I've made the first 6-footer, I start to feel the same way over that second 6-footer as when I'm in a tournament. And they're by themselves on a hole they've played a million times. So the key is getting them to understand that you can still make this putt when you feel like that. Tiger told me that it wasn't really about becoming calm. He just understood when he was young that when he felt a certain way in here, the ball would go 10 yards further, and when he felt more of it, he'd go 20 yards further. So he didn't try to meditate into this perfect state of mind. He just hit 9 instead of 7. That's just brilliant. So it's like so many of us are trying to change who we are to get to a better place rather than accept who we are and recognize where we tend to go off and understand when we do that. I think that's much more important because it's really difficult to change, but I think sometimes acceptance is far more important than understanding. And so the next day what we'll do is they have to hit every greenside shot into every regulation shot in a greenside bunker. And then on the back 9, they have to hit every regulation shot 30 to 50 yards short of the green. And the next day they have to go out. If they have a 5-iron, they've got to hit a hard 6. And then on the back 9, if they've got a 5-iron, they got to have soft 4. So yeah, we're training, we're measuring, and we're doing all this stuff. It looks like super scientific, but with my kids, I'm about 20% practice, 80% play. And I think that that's important because the game is going to teach them so much more than I could. As we move on through those different games, we move on to the different games, and we'll play a game where they have to hit all high cuts. On the back 9, they have to hit low cuts, and then they have to hit high draws and hit low draws. And that, when they play that and they track it, it shows me where we need to go. Because it's easy just to go to the camera and the TrackMan and sit there and feel like you're doing a good job and knowing that they're leaving happy and feeling safe and all that. But it's not necessarily, that doesn't make a Navy SEAL. That's not what happens. So you find out that you might change the way that they move in transition because they can't cut the ball. And I think, look, there's been players who have been successful curving the ball one way. But I think the best could do kind of anything they wanted with it. And so I think of working on a neutral pattern to where they know through changing a ball position and foot alignments and all these little simple things that seem simple that have such a massive effect on the shape or flight of the ball. So that's how I look at the mental side. It's like get them on the course where they're always challenged. So it's easy. What do the kids do? The kids play with their friends in a golf cart in 3 hours. And then they get to a tournament. They play with 2 guys they don't like who don't talk to them. And they walk, and it takes 5.5 hours. That's not SEAL training. You know what I mean? I get my kids to go out at noon and play with Mr. Jones, his wife, and another man who can't break 100, and they take forever to play. Just so he can see the roller coaster and how it's happening. Because if you're going to play in 2 hours in a cart, I mean, they don't even need yardages. That's one of the other games. If I've got a kid who's struggling with his iron play, I'll have him go play with no laser for a month. And it's funny when they start. What's funny is when they try to hit in the greenside bunker, how often they hit it to 2 feet. And then when they try to hit 2 feet, they hit it in the greenside bunker. So that kind of concludes that part. So it's just in conclusion to it is remember the experience is happening from inside out all the time, every day. That's simple. That's math at this point, in my understanding, my estimation. And that's due to where your mindset is, to where your mood is, and to where your awareness is. So back to the list of bullies, when those kids were a 5, they understood that I need to react in this situation as I do from a good mood because that's what I actually am. So because I'm in a bad mood, I know it seems like all this is occurring to me, but it's not happening. So that was very interesting. And in those classrooms we used it in, the teachers said it's been incredibly different. So I've used that in my junior program too. So it's like a kid 3-putts and he's like, that was it. After that 3-putt, I was done. Whereas a week before that, he had a 3-putt and it kind of inspired him to do better and he shot 4 under. So it's when he says the 3-putt stressed me out, it can't really stress him out because another time he used it to succeed. So it's not that. And then second is going to the understanding of can't take it from the range to the course. Whenever I hear that, I know I'm in the wrong place with him because there's something we're not doing properly that's making it so different. It's going to be different, but it shouldn't be like so different. And when I've got a kid who shoots 66 like 5 times a week, goes to a tournament, can't break par, then it starts. Got to get him a sports psychologist. Then his parents go, I see him do this, this, and this. And then the uncle says, I see him do this, this, and this. And the aunt says, I see him do this, this, and this. And then the poor kid loses his inner voice. Like, I know players on tour who came on tour, they never really had a lesson. And then they started to struggle. So their agent says, hey, this guy's good. Let's go talk to him. And then he's still not better. Let's talk to this guy. And next thing you know, he sits with 6 people every day to talk about everything that's wrong with him. And it's like this crazy codependency that's just not right. Because what happens is that inner wisdom, that intelligence that we all have, that intuition, it goes away because you can't hear your own voice anymore. And everyone who thinks they know what's wrong with you is totally speculating because they don't know what's wrong with themselves. So it gets difficult. When a player goes into a slump, bad golf is a guarantee. It's just so hard. It's just so arbitrary. Bad scores are a guarantee. You can play good golf and shoot a bad score. I mean, you can stand there and get ready to hit your 7-iron, and as soon as you make contact, it gusts 10 miles an hour more, and now you're plugged in the front bunker and you make double. But you hit like a really good shot. And that's what I love about golf, is it being the ultimate metaphor for life, is because you can do all the right things and still not get to where you want to get. Because there's all these other things that are working in serendipity that all need to kind of be moving in the same direction. So now, as we go a little more into the golf swing, is there any questions on this at this point? Yes. Thank you for coming.
When I specifically tell, and I teach mostly beginners or high amateurs,
All right.
I specifically calmly say, okay, now when I walk away from this lesson, I want you to swing 40% half swings, full bucket.
Mm.
And I say, please repeat that, okay? I turn around, I go to my next lesson, and lo and behold, she's going at 100 miles per hour.
Mm.
And full swings. And I'm like, what do they not hear? Does that happen to you ever?
Oh, of course. I mean, that happens at every lesson, right? Well, I think it's frustrating if you just don't accept that it happens. You know what I mean? I accept every day when I go to work, I accept complete chaos to break out. And when it doesn't, it's just kind of nice. You know what I mean? Like, I very rarely leave a tournament, or just even with working with the kids or whoever I work with, where I'm like, man, that went really good. I'm sitting there teaching him, like, man, I shouldn't even be teaching this guy. I don't even know what I'm doing. What am I even doing here? So it's just that thing that's occurring. So the good ones will do that, right? And that's important, because if you're going through full joint range in slow motion, you create more proprioception in the joint range, which gives us way more feedback, which then increases our output. So, I mean, that you could do a 5-hour speech on that, right? So, but the other thing too, though, is that if you practice slow all the time, your nervous system thinks, oh, that's what I do. So it's a combination. But I agree with you. When I'm working with beginners or amateurs, and I still do that, and I enjoy that. I mean, the guys will say, like, am I just going to hit the ball 40 yards for an hour? And I'm like, well, if you can't hit it 40 yards, you shouldn't try to hit it 200 yards. You know? Like, I remember when my son would say A, B, C, D, and then he couldn't get the E. And now at 8 or 9, he just finished reading the whole Harry Potter thing. And I remember being frustrated, like, God, why can't he read? Which is more my problem than his problem. And now he's eloquent, articulate, and I'm like, where'd this come from? Oh, it just came from every day learning the alphabet and then going k-a-t. And so it's been helpful for me in my coaching to realize, like, watching my sons kind of go through the education system, is like 6 months ago, they just could not do this. Like 9 times 8 was 75 every time, and it's like, it's not 75, right? And then as a parent, you get upset because you think it like looks bad on you, that you're not doing the right things, and it's all classic, right? But now he's like waxes poetically what it is, and he can do like bigger numbers in his head. But I've just watched him do that, so it's reminded me, like, just keep chipping away at it with your students. Because what I'm always reminding myself is, one, do no harm, because it's easy to do, especially with all the information out there, because something that's wrong can look like 1,000 different things because of all the understanding. So it's kind of like with the at med school, people start to get really sick. It's because every day they're learning about all these diseases they didn't know about. So they go home and they have a sniffle, and it could be like 60 different things. Whereas it used to just be allergies. Now it's like, oh, this is how leukemia starts. Right? And it's an epidemic, actually, in medical schools. So you're doing the right thing. My 8-year-old was in his room the other night because he made the wrong decision. So you can only do the job you can, and then let them go and do what they're going to do, you know, and just accept it. I think if you try to understand it, you'll lose your mind. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate everything you're saying, Danny, a lot. I know you were just in China at Nanchang. I gave a lecture there for a couple days. And just wondering what, if any, is there a cultural problem when you're explaining to us? It's more mental and conceptual, and and over there, it's more traditional. And so, did they accept what you were saying? Was it difficult to communicate?
Well, like at one point, I fully believed in Santa, and you couldn't tell me any different. But by the time I was 10, I was like, poor kids don't get presents. How could you put 7 billion presents on a flying sled? And he's too fat to fit down any chimney. My dad says nobody shrinks. I'm like, whatever, that doesn't happen. So I think you could just chip away at it. I think I won't say Asian because that's just not right, because the Chinese are so different than the Koreans, are so different than the Japanese, are so different than the Malaysians. They're so different. It's like saying North American. Canada and US are way different. And it's really similar, but that's just because we're human beings. So regardless of anything, we're all the same. Yeah, I think that, well, the thing is, in those cultures, right, like, if you look at South Korea and China, in the last 50 years, they've went from third world countries to superpowers. And maybe not South Korea being a superpower, but, I mean, it's gone from a third world country to a first world country in a short time. People work hard. They're family-based. They're educated. So there's a level of neuroticism and intellect that's driving that culture. And there's a lot of good parts of it, and then there's parts that aren't. I think when you get into elite sports, it doesn't matter the culture. I've seen parents just do crazy things. And being a parent, I get it. Until I was a parent, I didn't understand how they could lose the plot so badly. Until I was, it's like funny. You out with your kid, and my little one he's classic, and he'll be surfing on the conveyor belt with the luggage coming out. And when he does it, it's like grab him by the ear, smack in the head, stand there. But when another kid does it, I just smile. I'm like, oh, she's so cute. And then I'm like, I don't perceive him as a kid. I perceive him as this special being that he's still 6 years old. And yeah, of course he wants to surf on it. So I think the good part is, like, I have 22 kids right now in my academy are Chinese, and we have 2 kids from South Korea. And they work so hard, and they get better really quick. But, like, we take them surfing at the beach. They have mandatory basketball lessons twice a week. Trying to get them to... There's a combo. Because to me, if there's an absence of liberty and freedom in someone's soul, there's this feeling of oppression, and you can see it. You can see it. If you look at the best of the best, they typically beat to their own drum, and they don't really give a shit what anyone thinks. In some cultures, it's the opposite of that. And I think that if a player doesn't feel liberty and freedom to be who they are, there's not going to be that level of clarity. And then I think, too, what I've learned with the Chinese mainly is a lot of these parents, this is their first, they only have one child. They were only allowed to have one child up until, in the last 2 or 3 years. So they're the first generation to be able to provide this opportunity and this experience, and they're just all in, and it's great. I mean, look, if you have if I always tell my kids that struggle with their parents a bit, and like who didn't struggle with their parents, is if your biggest problem is that you have to play golf too much, and then you're like 3 billion kids would change realities with you in a heartbeat. Like when my kids are struggling, I just want to send them to Syria to a refugee camp and go work there for a week. You'll be fine when you come back. Okay? So that's the difficulty, right, is that to a lot of the players we coach, the idea of shooting 78 is this like traumatic experience because they've been fortunate enough not to have a lot of trauma. That might not be the best way forward. Ballesteros, if he didn't have a 3-iron on a beach, I don't think we would ever known who he was. If Pele wasn't taping up T-shirts and playing in the favelas where the ball couldn't hit the ground, that whole style of soccer would never have been created. So by the time Pele took that disadvantage, and Sevi, I would say just having a 3-iron on a beach is a disadvantage versus having a whole set. As soon as Sebi got clubs with loft around the green, they thought he was a genius, but he was just this playful kid learning this deep wisdom on the beach. So sometimes it's, you can go to academies and you can see like the wall of champions, and every kid on that wall were scholarshiped. No one who's paid to go to them has made it, because it's kind of tough to get them to dig deep when they've got it really good. Yes?
In that, do you feel comfortable enough to tell us what's
My arms. Oh yeah, no way. My mom is so mad. The didactics, I never intended to get a tattoo, ever. I don't like needles, and I'm a giant baby when I get it done. But this one right here is for perspective. That's the only one I ever had. And what happened is I was teaching a drug rep at Novartis, and so he sponsored a thing in Toronto with Sick Kids Hospital. And so they came out to Glen Abbey for the day, which is the home of the Canadian Open, where I was the director of instruction. And we raised some money, and the kids all came out. And right before I went to speak to the kids, they told me all these kids are terminal, which I could have used a little bit of time in advance for that. You know, it's a good thing I had like my David Duval Oakleys on, because you just couldn't see all the tears running down my eyes as soon as I heard that. So it was such an overwhelming experience for me that I just went straight to the place and got it. And then as time went on, I started to do more. So the didactics were 17th century Greek philosophers. Who the meaning is born with the intent to teach, with the ulterior motive to preach ethics. So that's a reminder to me that if a camera's on you the whole time, what you're preaching about right now, you better be able to live that. My soapbox that I get on. And then my favorite Bob Marley lyric of all time from Redemption Song is "Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds." And that was kind of the original thing that got me going in that direction. So this is the last song he wrote before he died. And he kind of always blamed how he felt on the circumstance of the colonialist and the white man and all that, but realized as his life was ending that the only person he was ever fighting against was himself, because he was creating and generating his reality and his understanding. This is compassion, love, integrity, empathy, pain and integrity. So compassion, empathy, gratitude, love, pain, and integrity. And they kind of have just added them. It's kind of like what I learned from Jesus. I'm not really religious, but I don't think you have to be to learn a lot from Jesus. And then this is Arabic which means from within. And so that's still a constant thing. Over here we have Mandela, who's my hero. If people can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. So it's not in us to be that way. There's no 4-year-old in the world who hates. It's not possible. They have to learn that. So that's kind of my stuff that my mom freaks out about. And then I wanted to talk about my influences. I think sometimes it's like I said, I don't have any original thoughts. So as I was coming up in the game and getting really fascinated with a golf swing and hitting the ball well, my first influence is obviously Greg McHatton. And I never really steered that far away from that, because I thought that the one thing my dad liked, and the reason that he sought out Greg, was because my dad was a scientist, and he liked the golf machine. And we can argue now if it's total science, but the point is, at least it was a system. So I would go for a lesson, and someone would say, "Get your elbow like this," and someone would say, "Get your grip like this," and my dad was like, "This has just got no method to it." So that's what I had learned first. Jim Flick was, these are all huge influences. Chuck Cook, Butch Harmon, Ledbetter, Davis Love Sr., obviously Eddie Mehrens, Mac O'Grady, Ben Doyle, Peter Costas, Peter Cowan, Dennis Pugh, John Jacobs, Peter Croker, Bob Tosky. If someone came to me, I could teach every one of those systems to anybody. So I think it's my job to know exactly what everyone else does and what they believe in. I think we're all saying similar things, just in different ways. So I think it's important that even if you disagree with it. So even if you disagree with it, I don't really agree with what Jimmy Ballard talks about, but I could teach you how to do it right now. So I think that's important that we know that. I think in other businesses, Kodak knows what Fuji's doing. They all have an idea of what each other are doing. And I think sometimes in golf, it becomes so territorial of, are you one plane or stack and tilt or this or that? Look, they all have parts that have principles. So Adam Scott and Jim Furyk are doing like 10 of the same things, even though they look totally different. Okay, so their shoulder goes from abduction into internal rotation, into external rotation. The scapula retracts. Okay, their core's firing. They're creating external rotation. Their pelvis is flexing. All that's happening. So that's what I'm looking at, the principle. So when a player comes to me for the first time, I always ask myself, like, where's the tumor? Because there's like a lot of shaving cuts. But like, what's the thing that's really not allowing them to be successful at this? And that's kind of what I put the chemo on for a long time. And then understanding different grips, different levels of mobility, what Mark's going to talk about, and Mark's study into physiology and biomechanics, and making sure that you adapt that to what the player's limitation is. So the fact of the matter is most people who come to see us for lessons sit in a chair all day at a computer like this, and now they're on cell phone. So there's a good chance they're not going to be able to do a lot of things in their backswing you'd like them to do because they have no mobility and their shoulders don't work and there's really no connection functionally to their brain. So it's like, for me, having beginners to amateurs to people who are good players but they're aging, to get them to keep their right knee bent and try to get them to turn their upper body against their lower body is just a losing fight. It's like we look back to Nicholas and Nelson and all those guys and how they used to kind of unweight that left heel. It didn't mean they didn't have pressure in their big toe, but they unweight their left heel, they straighten their right leg, their heads never really moved. So when the commentator says, keep in your spine angle, someone goes to the range and they stay in their spine angle and they right bend or they forward bend this hard and now they've got no chance. So where are they going to come from here to hit the ball that's over there? Then they're going to come this way. So when they say, look at Dustin Johnson, how well he stays in his posture, I mean, he's like standing straight up. That's why he goes straight down. And that's why the ball goes that way. Plus, he's also like a beast of a human being. His wrists are like as thick as one of mine, or both of mine. From the new school, I guess, these guys have had influence on me. Andy Plummer, Joe Mayo, Calvin Miyahara, George Gankis, Mark Blackburn, Jamie Mulligan, Jeff Smith, Dana Dalquist, Chris Como, Scott Hamilton, John Tillery, Drew Steckel, Marty Joyce, Sean Webb, and TJ Eaton. So these are all guys I study. Everything they do, everything they put out, I read it every day. And if you're open, what it does is it creates a level of diversity in your understanding. And diversity is so important. Stanford did a study years ago on diversity. They wanted to see if it had any effect on education. And so they took groups of people, so say all white men, all black men, all Muslims, all Jews, all Sikhs, and they did this. They took all math teachers, all English teachers, and they created these questions that were about the same level of intellect eventually when they came to the reasoning. And they noticed that when the group was as diverse as possible, they came up with the right answer 70% more of the time. And so what they, in conclusion, in summation, they realized, like, when it was a Christian and a Jew and a Muslim and a Buddhist and a Sikh, and the Christian guy said, well, it's like this, and the Buddhist says, but is anything really that way? And so there's more challenge. So the issue that happens in non-diversity is the alpha males come out, the alpha females come out, and then people are just kind of following to not fall out of line or be out of place. So if you're in a group that's exactly like you, the chance of you really learning much more. And that's why, today's day and age is dangerous, because every day my phone sends me a thing saying, what would you like to read today? So I want to read the stuff that's all the way over there, and I want to read the stuff that's all the way over there. A lot of times when you read things you don't agree with, it gives you more of an understanding of what you already agree with. So the same issues we're having in society, we're having in golf instruction. So these guys who get on these blogs and beat each other up, it's so silly. It's just golf. It's like it's golf. It's not a big deal, right? And then it seems to me they have a difficulty in giving credit to where they learned all the stuff. Look, I'm trying to give my student the highest probability for success. There are so many smart people out there. I'm going to totally use everything I've learned from them and see where it fits into what I need to know. So I'm grateful that there's so many different theories, and there's so many, I don't think there's many different principles, but there's different theories. And I think that that's really important. So I'm looking for as much diversity in my learning as I can possibly get. I've been fortunate to talk to Mike Krzyzewski and so many coaches in different sports. And I think if you look at Mike Krzyzewski, all he talks really about is love. There's plenty of people. There's plenty of basketball guys who know the X's and O's and offense systems better than some of the great coaches. But, I remember Mike Krzyzewski won the national championship, and they said, Mike, this is your 6th national championship. And he stopped the interviewer and he said, no, this is my first with these guys. So he's got all these young African-American men who are kissing him on the lips in national television. That's unbelievable. That's absolutely unbelievable. That's why those guys play the way that they play, because as the pro said, they are inspiring, motivating, educating. I think inspiring more than motivate. It's tough to motivate someone, like what you were talking about. You can inspire them and hope they learn. Education and entertainment. And I think that the great coaches, they do all those things. I know when my guys, this year at the Masters on Sunday, Justin and I figured like 98 miles an hour is a fast 6-iron. So we don't really go off of club head speed on a driver. We go off club head speed on like a 6-iron. And we're sitting there, and when I hugged him, because everyone's so much bigger than me, when I hug them, I can feel them, right? And so he was beaten pretty good, and he felt like his nervous system felt on, like he was on. Like, they talk about the Kentucky Derby horses like the day before they start jumping in the stalls because they know it's time to race. And that's what it felt like. And so we get to 6-iron, and I've spent a million hours with this guy. And he's hitting his wedges, and I'm like, wow, these are going way further. So I'm just kind of paying attention. I don't want to add thought, so I'm just paying attention, to before, if I have to say something. Hopefully I don't. And by the time we get to 6-iron, he's at 102. We've never been over 100. And so then I'm like, hey, can I show you something? On the first hole, if you're going to hit 8, you probably should hit 9 and choke down on the grip. Because I've never seen him ever do this before. So I think the amount of energy it'll take to like calm down and meditate and focus and do whatever they tell us to do, which only works like when you're in the right mindset anyways, is not that helpful. And just being able to grab a player and just like say, look around, bro. Like, I know you're nervous and everything like that, and that's cool, but I mean, look at this range right now. And we look over, there's Adam Scott, there's Jordan Spieth, there's Dustin Johnson, there's Tiger Woods. I'm like, man, if you can't be grateful for this. So the nerves that you're feeling right now is pressure that you're putting on yourself, but understand that's a privilege to feel that way right now. We wouldn't feel any pressure if we were doing the walk of shame. The walk of shame is at a major is being the first to tee off. So showing up at the range when there's no fans. Okay? I hate it. And then my golf influence who aren't instructors. Obviously, Jesus, Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Harriet Tubman, all those amazing people. But in the golf world, Craig Davies is my roommate on tour. He's a sports chiropractor. He also works with Mark Blackburn and Kevin Chappell. And he's brilliant. He's a healer, and he's fantastic. Just always great energy, right? We are great energy. Okay, like we're like the main point I'm making is that well-being is not something that's built. Well-being is just blocked. We are well-being. Like that's what we are, right? So like the 7 steps to well-being is just not. It's 400 pages of something we don't need to read because we already have well-being. Okay, it's only blocked. Mark Bull, who's a biomech in England. Scott Lynn, who is a biomech at Cal State Fullerton, who does all the education seminars for Swing Catalyst. I've known Scott for 10 years. Greg Rose, Mark Lindsay, Mark Scabatici, they're both Canadian chiropractors from an older generation that kind of created a lot of the treatments that we use today. They're brilliant, brilliant men. So I found it important from an anatomy and a physiology standpoint because, we're looking at a golf swing. It's being driven by how we create force. So you can't have a motion if you don't have a force that's preceding it. And it's this complex movement of fascial slings and torques and rotations and flexes and extensions and abductions and adductions. So I thought knowing the anatomy of the body was probably pretty necessary. It's not really helped me as a coach, I wouldn't say, but at least I know what those parts of the body are and what they recruit and what they're important for. But without these guys, like assessing my players, I'd feel a little fearful on the range from time to time. Because I'll see something weird, and then I'll go and talk to them, and they're like, this glute's not even activated. I'm like, oh, that's great. And they can still play really good, but the danger is that when I see something, that I don't start to go, hey, do this more. And adding thought again, just adding more, right? We're always trying to strip away thought before we play. We're not trying to add it. Justin Buckthorpe is one of Justin's trainers. He's created this thing called 360 Health Performance. He works with functional medicine. So he does a lot of the testing on chemically where the player's at. And so like around the birth of a child, players, it's really different, right? And some of them feel like they saw this child, they realize why they're here, and they play great, better than they've ever played. But that's not normally the case. The case is like, I have to focus on this other life now when my whole life's been about me. That tends to happen a little bit too. Ramsey McMaster, he's passed away, but he's a brilliant Australian physio. Chris Welsh was the first person to teach me biomechanics with Xenolink back in 1999. Tony Morgan from K-Vest, Mike Bentley from everything, K-Vest, Blast Motion, you name it. He's a brilliant guy. And then also a man who's here today, Art Maffei, who was a physicist at NASA, who sent me an email years ago, and I thought he was crazy. And so I met with him for dinner in Los Angeles. I don't know him from anybody. And he starts telling me these things, and I'm like, oh, I've seen that before. But he could really explain it. So even if he wasn't a great golfer, when you can land a spaceship on the moon, you can probably look at the downswing and get a pretty good idea of what's happening. So that's what I'm saying by going outside of the community of golf and instruction and looking at different places for, I mean, if you go to school, you go to a university and you talk to a physicist, they got a way better idea what's happening in transition to the club than I do. So it's, you know, you got to go outside of what you do to see those different aspects. And so, yeah, that's mainly what I want to talk about. As far as we can get to the golf swing now, as far as you asking me some questions on the golf swing or what's important. Because like I said, it's so abstract and it's so not one size fits all that it's difficult to just say, do this, do this, do this, do this. Because from a principle standpoint, is it really about being on plane? I think plane's an arbitrary line. I don't really believe in that as much anymore. Is it about getting the center of mass in line with the net force vector of the hand path? 100%. It's about that. Because the guys with a short backswing who are laid off, they tip it out in the downswing. And the guys who are long and across the line, of course, Bubba Watson and Fred Couples didn't like instructors because they all tried to get them on plane. So they're saying, well, you're just really talented. That's why you're hitting it good. But you'll be better if you get more like this. I mean, and you just stand there and watch them hit the ball. It's like, I think they're doing the right things. You know? And so I've been, look, like I said, I've lost sleep. I've damaged players. That's something that you have to live with for the rest of your life. But it wasn't malicious. That's what keeps driving the curiosity and the learning, is not wanting to do that again. So like kids who come to me now are safer than they've ever been, right? They're safer than they've ever been. And you know, you watch players who bounce around from coach to coach to coach to coach to coach. Remember, every time you learn something, you start to build myelin in the brain. So myelin is the insulation that wraps around neural circuits that fires according to certain signals. So I think it's quite astonishing. Like Jack Nicklaus's, his keys were head still, okay, but he was allowed to turn it. And if you don't turn it, you're not going to turn either, right? Head still, turn this right pocket back, and drive this left knee towards the target. So no matter if he was hitting it great or bad, when he went to Jack Grout, that's all they did. So who's to say that's the most efficient way to swing? Maybe it's not. But if that's all you ever do and you don't create cross patterns, you know, when you see guys who are really good and then they misunderstood their experience and they started looking under every rock for the answer, and they started going from a flat backswing to an upright backswing to a grip change to driving their legs to squatting to jumping. Those guys can't break 85 anymore, whereas they never shot over 80 when they were 10. That's the danger, right? So sometimes you have to be okay. Like the one thing I've learned that's really helped me is when I see someone for a lesson, I don't need to fix anything. I mean, my dream is to stand there and be like, I don't have to do anything with this guy. Right? So when my kids are in that place, I'm like, what do you know about Nelson Mandela? Nothing. Oh, man, all right. You had a 10-page essay next week on Mandela. Right? And a lot of my kids I don't charge, so I'm able to do that. Right? I like to go to New York and charge them in Wall Street and then be able to work with 80% of my kids I don't charge. Because I think it's important. Because a lot of them would never be able to afford. I mean, it's funny, like in Golf Digest, they list what you charge. I've never charged anyone that. Right? The thing with lists too, right? Let's talk about this for fun, just for entertainment's sake, is these lists become such a standard of who's good and who's not. And so, like, I remember when I was on the Charlie Rose show, and he said, you're on the front cover of Golf Digest. And look, that meant a lot more to me when I was first on it than when I realized what it meant. It was more cool for my mom and dad because they would have expected to see me on the prison memo, not not the front cover of Golf Digest. And to grow up and like, really like love these instructors that came before me. To see yourself at that place where like Peter Costas was like, wow, that's crazy. Even if you agree or disagree with him, it's still cool. It's okay to have friends you disagree with. I think it's important, actually. But Charlie said to me, what's it like? You're a young man, you've been ranked second. And I started laughing, and he's like, what's so funny? And I said, well, Charlie, I understand why I am second. Okay, so first of all, I work with a bunch of guys who were already on tour before I met them. All right. Second, Tiger had won 4 out of his last 6 tournaments. Hunter won 1 before that. And then Justin Rose, the voting was on Monday, and Justin Rose just won the U.S. Open on Sunday. So I'm fresh in the minds. Because 2 years later, after I got fired by Tiger, I dropped quickly to 11. So I think it's nice to be honored and whatever, but it still shows where we're at in the game, because if you look at the top 10 every year, I mean, they average around 70 years old. And as time moves on and the generations change, that top 10 will change. And because I'll tell you what, my friend Butch Harmon, he doesn't feel like #1 instructor in the world. He's just trying to do no harm as well, right? So I think you got to be careful on those. There's so many great teachers who don't coach on the PGA Tour. Because you coach on the PGA Tour doesn't mean everything. It doesn't really mean. I mean, if you got a guy on the PGA Tour and all you did was coach him to understand in a 20-mile-an-hour wind how much it affects every distance that he hits it, right? So we do this. If you see me with the TrackMan on the range, a lot of times we have a windometer, and we're doing the wind. And at 20 miles an hour, the 5-iron's affected by this much, the 7-iron's affected by this much. Remember, into the wind is not increasing backspin. When you have more airflow and momentum and force of wind, you have more lift. And then what happens is the ball goes up like turbulence in a plane. It stays in the air for longer. And if it's in the air for longer, it's getting slowed down for longer. So it looks so technical when we're out there and we're like doing this and this, and we're looking and we're doing this, and we're writing down numbers. But when he stands on the first hole of the Masters and it's blowing 40 miles an hour, and I've been there since the morning, I've timed the gust, and the gusts are never longer than 21 seconds. They typically last 13 seconds. I'm timing that. But look, there's a lot on the line. Like, I'm on a percentage of what they earn. I'm trying to do anything I can to give us the probability of being more successful. So you see my player get on the tee, and they say his name, and then he's just standing behind the ball waiting like 1, 2, and as soon as the gust gone, he steps in and hits it. And the next player gets up from Australia, Adam Scott, and Adam gets up there and rips one. Then we get down there, and he's 30 yards behind my player, but they hit it the same distance. He hit it in the middle of the gust, and we waited till the gust dropped. So that's all just important. Like, it's so important to know how far the ball goes. So Justin Rose has a list of all the wind speeds and how much it affects each club. And it doesn't affect them all. It doesn't all affect them the same. Like when we're at courses with elevation, you can't just say set 10%. Because at that elevation, wedges and drivers are affected totally different. So I know it seems like very heady and intellectual that we would do that, but really what that does is free him up to have less thought. Because he knows, he kind of has more of an idea what it is. He's not like, you think it's 8? He knows it's 7. And so standing over the ball, getting ready to hit a shot, a lot of times it looks mental, but if you don't really know where your target is, you don't know where the wind is, and you're not sure if it's the right club, you're going to look mentally incapable, but you just didn't really have a decision or an intention on what was going to happen anyways. So to me, like, a pre-shot routine is much more left brain than it is right brain. I don't think that Justin Rose needs to, or Siwoo Kim or whoever it is, Adam Scott, need to visualize their shot. They are walking professional golfers. Okay, they don't need to sit there and see it. Like people say, well, you look at Jason Day, he got to #1 in the world because of his pre-shot routine, his visualization. Well, he's still doing it now when he's hitting it all over the place. So it can't be from that. It has to be, to an extent, from a swing standpoint, that maybe that the center of mass is in line with the net force vector too quickly. That's probably what it is. Now, when you get to #1 in the world, maybe you go, well, I don't really like this. This is a little crazy. Like, this is too much attention. So who knows if you sabotage yourself to start playing more poorly so you get rid of the attention. Because the fact is, when you make a double, the cameras go away. And there's a lot of pros on tour who don't like the cameras being there. So all of a sudden they make a double. Someone thinks it's mental, but it's kind of like a sense of, it's sabotage, but it's almost like self-protection because, okay, the camera's gone. Whew. Whew, I feel better now. It's fascinating, like the stuff that you see. You can't believe that these guys are mentally more competent than anybody else. They're just physically better than us. They're human beings who are struggling and suffering just as much as we do. Just as much as we do. But it's easy just to go, look at how mentally capable he is. He's a really good putter. He's got a great short game, hits his irons the right distance, and drives it awesome. So I'm guarantee you he's out there shaking in his boots, but it's still going well. So we can't think that there's good nerves and bad nerves. That just gets us into faulty narratives. Yes, sir.
If you have a really talented young junior like all the kids that you have there,
I'm good.
blueprint,
Yeah, thank you.
you feel like you have a blueprint to find a balance between busy lives, school, playing other sports, and making sure they don't go down that road of just being obsessed with just golf and burning out people.
Listen to my friend Dave Woods as a caring father with a son who's really good at golf. So, yeah, I agree, bud. He's also very good at soccer. He's very good at throwing a football. I think that's mandatory. I think the question was with a junior golfer, you know, do you have a blueprint with them? Are they just playing golf or playing other sports? I think that by playing other sports, so like a lot of our good Canadian players that play hockey for 7 months and golf for 4 months, right? They tend to be more linear players with more vertical because it's kind of tough to create a massive couple force of rotation on the ice. There's not really any way. I mean, you'd stick your skate in the ice. But Graham Dillette, a lot of those guys weren't really good junior golfers until they decided to be good at golf, but they were so good at other sports. I think when you're playing basketball, you know, basketball or volleyball, I mean, you're just going into triple flexion, triple extension. That's happening in the golf swing all over the place. When you're playing other sports where there's quick rotations and things like that, that's happening as well. So for me, I think it's mandatory that kids play a lot of sports because with golf, what we know is overuse injuries happen more when we do the same thing every day. So you see a guy like Bubba Watson, he doesn't really get injured. It's because he never hits the same shot twice. You know, he's not really applying force to the same part of his body. And look, there's not a safe way to swing. There just isn't. At the speeds these guys are at now, no one's really getting hurt here and here. It's all pretty much from, I think a lot of guys get hurt in their backswing by locking down this right side, not letting it move. And then I think a lot of guys get hurt in the braking phase. So they generate more energy and they accelerate harder than they can decelerate. So getting them to power lift is just going to get them to accelerate better, but they can't decelerate the speed that they accelerate. So a lot of times, like with my kid Cameron Champ, who everyone will become accustomed to knowing in the next 4 or 5 years as he matures, I mean, he swings at 132 miles an hour and hits 63% of his fairways. I mean, he's carrying the ball 330 yards with a 7-degree launch at 3,500 spin. And he's like, man, my back's aggravated. I'm like, it's always going to be. You just, you know, I mean, there, you know, a good way to not hurt yourself is just swing really slow. So remember, we're generating a force outward, but that force is coming back into us. So as Art explained to me years ago, he believed that if a player was creating 100% of transferable energy, that the brain would only allow him to transfer 30% of it just because of the danger in the braking phase. So, and then you got to be careful when you're working with players who are injured because the brain is going to really avoid that pain and things will start changing really quick. Really quick. So I love when some of my players have issues with getting the left arm up in abduction because they just pin it across their chest all day so it doesn't hurt and they hit it so straight when they do that. So I'm always hoping their shoulder's a little sore so they don't start lifting it and trying to send it. But yeah, with a kid, it's like you can't play enough sports until you get to a certain age if you're serious about it because their ability to use the ground, their ability to move, their ability to use their vestibular system, balance, proprioception, even just the social aspect of the other sports, right? I mean, it's amazing to go to AJJ event now and see every kid with tape on his wrist or his knee or something like that, you know. And the funny thing is, like Jordan Spieth was a star athlete in a bunch of different sports, and Dustin and Gary Woodland were too. I think that Tiger Woods generated kind of that. So Tiger made golf like really cool, and the way he played it was beautiful and exciting. So a lot of kids who probably now would be tight ends or wide receivers or quarterbacks became golfers. So we have 6'2", 200-pound guys who create a lot of vertical force, create a ton of speed, and have a lot of linear speed from having longer levers. So if you look at 1970, like there's not going to be many Miller Barbers left, even though he flushed it from a really bad backswing. I guess it wasn't that bad of a backswing, right? Any more questions here? Yes.
Talk about the importance of variety in sports for the young players, but what about an elite player? Rory McIlroy before the British plays soccer, breaks his leg. I mean, was that just bad luck, or should he at that point really be calculating and saying, "Here are the odds-on favorite of the course he's never shot above 70 on, and he really shouldn't have been doing that"? Like, what's your approach with the guys there? Like, they're in Hawaii, go surf, have some fun, or you really shouldn't do that?
Well, I mean, I just let them go. I'll let them do what they need to do. I mean, obviously that probably wasn't the right idea, but if he'd played that day and he was a bit stressed about playing and it took kind of his attention off of the tournament and he had a good time, maybe that turns into a look. If he doesn't understand where his experience coming from, I don't think any of it matters, really. So you got to live. I mean, there's a lot on the line, but, would he have done it if he was dead broke? I don't know. So it's, yeah, I see your point. Do I want my guys to go snowboarding 10 times a year? Probably not, because you do this a lot. And these are important, right? The risks are really important. Sergio, I think Sergio hurt himself too. I think David Duval, Davis Love. I mean, those were almost career-ending injuries. And then we didn't know what we know now, so they come back too early and don't realize their backswing's changing by a half a foot. Their body's not moving as much. And now they're hitting a shot they've never hit. And then they go to a coach who changes their grip. It's all it's all pointless. It's just not necessary for it all to happen like that. Yes, Mr. Mulligan. Thank you. Yeah.
He's never bought me a beer. He's never done anything. Right now, he is going to the bathroom. Remember when you hugged Justin Rose?
Uh-huh.
Okay. He's way more nervous than that right now. I want to see Nick come over and hit a couple golf balls with you, and I want you to help Nick because when him and I have a beer, we never talk about golf because I don't want to talk about golf with my pal that I have a beer with.
Me neither.
Okay, cool.
I have a thing on tour. Like, after I leave the range, we're not discussing golf anymore. So, I mean, the first part of the lesson for Nick is, one, you're not on tour, so this doesn't matter if you're good at golf or not. Two, everyone here wants to see you hit a good shot, and no one cares if you really hit a bad shot. So that's the first part of the lesson, is that no one cares. Okay? Right? So why don't you do me a favor, and at that pin, I wanted to see you hit a 25-yard hook. Oh. Okay, that was pretty good, right? So I think it's sometimes when you get where you feel really tight and tense, if you just get more into the creative brain and go, just hit me a huge hook, it kind of dissipates a bit. Like, you're still nervous, but it's a lot easier to do that than hit a straight one at that point, right? Now give me a high 3-yard cut with no divot. Okay, that was, come on. Wow. So
Now do it again. Can we go drink now?
We had this talk earlier. He's like, you need me to hit balls? I'm like, nah, it's all right, bud. It's okay. He's like, all right, cool. Whew, whew. So when Jamie was talking to him, I saw Nick walking over, and he's like, oh, boy. oh my gosh. And then he actually hit 2 exact shots pretty much like we asked, right? So if you were nervous, your heart's pumping, you're thinking, oh my gosh, this and this and that. But that just proves my point. Like, I just changed his intention in doing something else. Because what I find is when players get there, the mechanics are like a safety blanket. If I just hinge it right, oh my God, right? Or if I just complete my turn. And what happens is perfection always gets in the way of greatness every single time. So what I learned from Brene Brown is that the perfectionist, she's a professor at Stanford, is perfection is a disease in the sense that, like, we think if we can just find what's perfect, like all the embarrassment and shame and guilt we'll go through will never ever happen again in our life. And so we chase this thing and it's just not worth it. Let me see. We're at St. Andrews. We got 40 miles an hour wind off the left, and you have to hold it into the wind, and it can't get above that tree. I mean, you look pretty freaking good to me, right? I'm glad that Jamie didn't ask me because I wouldn't have been nervous, but I just wouldn't have been able to pull off the shots because I'm just not good anymore. So people are like, were you nervous? No, I'm just not good. That's part of my pre-shot routine is to remind myself that I do suck. Okay? That I've found that important in my career because the problem is, as Mark can probably attest to and Jamie can attest to, is we're around these guys who are so good that we'll be out there. I'm like, what are you going to do here, pro? Because I always have to ask that. So what does a great shot look like? He's like, well, the wind's here. I'm going to hold it up. I'm going to hit it 80%. Might heel it slightly. And so when I go play as a 3 handicap, I stand there and my 15 handicap partner, who's my partner because he always makes sure there's Heinekens in the cooler. Okay? That brought me back to the game. He's like, what do you see? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to hold up a little cut. And then he goes, remember, you suck. And I go, I'm going to play it back in my stance, hit 20 degrees down on it, and get it on the middle of the green. Right? And then I get on the tee. He goes, what do you think? I'm like, well, what's that bunker? He's like 280. I'm like, well, if I hit up on it 5 and create about 112 miles an hour clubhead speed, if I slightly toe it, and then I aim way left, play it forward, and do everything I can to make sure I hit the biggest pull slice I can so I can find it again. And I found a way to stay at a 3 handicap with 0 practice by just accepting what I can do, and not really. You're not going to really see me ever go with a left pin, because I hook the ball well. I don't draw it very well, and that's because I unfortunately, after pro taught me everything I probably needed to know, I went and did about 75 other swings. So my myelins kind of get crossed up quite a bit. That was great. You did it. Right? So he just learned now when he's in the section event and he doesn't play well and he goes, man, I was just nervous. He probably wasn't that nervous, and he executed everything pretty good. But I do think it's important when you feel a certain way to get way more into shape, because it regardless of how you're feeling, you still have a creative, intuitive side and you have an intellectual side. And I think when we feel fear and we feel doubt, it's quite easy to try and think our way out of it, whereas we already have the right response. So what I want to take you through now is, just because we know that the golf swing's so different for every single person, but the principles aren't that much, I think it's important to understand really what the dimensions of how we create force. So every player that we've measured on Swing Catalyst for all these years, they're all skating side to side, some more than others, some predominantly. They're all going toe heel, creating a couple force, okay, as they're pushing and pulling in rotation. So we see a lot of the rotation, but they're not really trying to rotate so much. The way they're creating force is what's creating that motion. And when you mix the side to side with the toe heel with vertical, you'll see this beautiful rotation. So rotation I think is more of an effect, not so much a cause. I don't remember Pro saying anything about rotation. He talked about set it, swing it. And so I think, what Pro found out a long time ago is that, and I think Tosky and Flick were very correct and onto something about this for certain players, is that when they have external cues that are distal, so proximal is like close to my center, distal's away from it. If their cues are external, their body just reacts. Now, I don't think that's the same case for everyone. So that's what I'm saying. When you get down to where, like, someone getting on their knees and hitting golf balls, I think is a great skill set to learn and have. But I don't think it's necessarily for everybody. So as we're looking at that, they're doing it that way. That's how they do it. And so, for example, someone like Gary Woodland creates a lot of torque and a lot of side to side. So Gary Woodland doesn't have much vertical at all. Okay, so he's not really jumping that much. Okay, if you look at Justin Thomas, you can kind of tell what he is. So the amount of girls, especially, that I've got who are really good and now they're not, were told they had to stop jumping. But that's how they generated a lot of their force. And what happens is, how did the forces work? Like, I'll probably have to ask Art this, but it's like, so you've got these forces from the ground into the body, into the arms, into the hands, and then moving outwards. And then you've got the forces that you're putting into the grip. And so we are opposing left and right. So saying that the clubs need to marry on the grip together is not accurate, because the left side's pulling, the right side's pushing. Sometimes the right side can be pulling, the left side can be pushing. No one really does it the same. I think we're really close. I think if you look at Dr. Kwan's research and then you look at Sasho McKenzie's research, I think I'm a little bit more understanding like what we're doing to the grip and how we respond and react to that. So, for example, if you watch players who go from the top and they go into early extension, there's about 100 guys who won majors who did that, so it's not like a death move, right? I see kids who are really good players, and they will just sit there with a cardboard box until they can hit balls with their butt on it, and they don't realize how much shorter they get. But they've been told, like, you got to keep your butt back. Well, you better be, there's not many 15-year-olds strong enough to keep their butt back, okay? And then if you got kids who played volleyball, of course they're going to go like that. That's all they did, is go like that. So what you can do is, knowing they're going to do that, you can line up the club in transition that'll completely go along with it. So the difficulty is, one guy says, what we do in the ground creates everything in the club, and the other guy says, what we do in the club creates everything in the ground. I think the job that we have is to kind of marry a little bit those 2 points. Because I don't think, whenever anybody says to me something that's the only way, I always veer away from it, because it's like, it just can't be the only way. I mean, we know they're doing this to it, and they're doing this to it, and we know they're doing this to it, and this to it. We know that. But that's the danger, right, is that you get a kid who's 16, if you know a little bit about vertical force, like, look, I find it intimidating with the way the game's moving. And I know people find it intimidating as it's becoming more, it's becoming a little more articulate on exactly what's happening. Remember, when the sun used to go down generations ago, people were freaked out that the devil was coming. Then we found out that the sun does go down because the earth is orbiting around it. It's not so scary anymore. So whenever you increase understanding, there's more security in that. So at some point, we used to bleed people out who were sick, thinking we'd get the evil spirits out of them. Well, we know that's not the case anymore. But so there's nothing wrong with the direction the game's moving in. But I think you have to offset that with, like, those games that I make the kids play where it's thoughtless. So they've got to hit 5-iron from 120 yards, 140 yards, 150 yards, and from 205 yards. And what do they basically do? They change the face position, ball position, alignment. And so I just personally, because I'm a bit of a perv about the golf swing, I have to protect them from not standing on the range with me for 2 hours being perfect. That's my error. So it's more important than that. You get a kid's not playing that good, and then you take him on the golf course, and you realize that he can't get up and down out of a bunker, but you're trying to get him to hit 4 up on it so he can hit it 20 yards further. It's like, what am I doing right now? Right? Of course, the kid thinks he needs to drive it and hit it perfect because he can't get up and down if he misses a green. So, and I think, too, when they play the games where they go out and they aim in the greenside bunker, I've seen kids who are not hitting their irons well fly it in a greenside bunker for 10 holes in a row. And the greenside bunker is smaller than the green every time. So when people go, well, you got to play the game and do this and that, I mean, we play drawbacks every day. So a kid taps it up to 2 feet, well, always drop back. So there's no such thing as a good putt. You know, I just played my men's member guest. I shouldn't have been taking all those 2-footers because I missed a couple of them. Should have seen on this one. This was to like go up by 1 in the match. And I think I yipped after I hit it. So I was over it and I putted it and then I yipped. So I was like, well, maybe that's a new thing that I can teach people, right? Time your yip. So that's what we do in the ground, right? Now, in the planes of the body, when I hear the word plane, I think of what the body does. So the 3 planes of movement in the body and it's each segment in the joints is we have, obviously, we have flexion and we have extension, all right? So if you look at, you could argue a lot of the power comes from that change in the rate of it and the magnitude and the timing of it. So players going from flexion to extension. So I think Dustin Johnson, perfect example of it. You know, for that guy on his driver, for his head to stay dead still, he has to be moving up and away from the ground. So his ankle's going from dorsiflexion more into plantar. His knee's going from flexed into extended. And then his pelvis is moving up as well. And so what's important is when we think about, like, if you look at the amateurs, right, they don't turn well. And then we try to get them to turn. But it's important to understand that in order for us to say complete our turn, and I don't think turning is the key to everything, but I see a lot of good players who they turn. Okay, so I think it's a principle. I've not seen many good players just pick their arms up and do that. Okay? But a lot of the rotation we see in a big turn is coming from the ankle and the knee. So if the tibia is not externally rotating, all right, for me, I get some issues because I'm pronated in valgus with a pelvis that's anterior. So I struggle a little bit with how I pivot because I can't actually do it. And if I do it well, I hit it better, but then I have to ice for like 2 weeks. And I like to use the ice for my Heinekens, not for my body. And so a lot of the rotation we're seeing in players coming from the ankle, tibia is going internal, femur is going internal. So glute max under EMG, it fires at the highest capacity. So it's around 97%. Okay. You have to have a lot of external rotation in the femur to load glute max. So telling someone to keep their knee bent, unless they're like in Cirque du Soleil, is not helpful. It's just not helpful, right? It's just not helpful at all. So allowing all of this to kind of load up and passively load the tissue. So under the tensegrity model, you know, we're generating energy from the ground. We're generating energy on how hard we're snapping in the grip. And then elastically, we're generating energy as well. So we have these fascial slings. So my big toes ultimately connected to the tip of my tongue. So we're not really now ligaments and tendons and joints. There's this level of collagen in the tissue and this tensegrity that it's all one chain. So they didn't start knowing this until they started having the technology to go into live people and see how the tissue is interacting. Because what happens is when they would do it on a cadaver, at the moment of death, this kind of life force or tissue is just gone, so they could never, thank you, sweetie, they could never find it. So yeah, it's not a bad thing that someone is getting taller in their backswing and getting shorter on their downswing. So when a player's in the lead of the tournament, he's going great, and then he hits one bad shot, and Johnny Miller, who I love, goes, he's dropping too much. It's like, well, he's in the lead. He did it on every shot. It's not from that, right? He wanted to hit 7. His caddy thought it was an 8, and he wanted to show his caddy he was wrong. That happens, by the way. Okay, that actually happens. The shoulder is such an important thing. The spine is such an important thing. So if we lock all this down, I mean, we only have 10 degrees of rotation through our lumbar spine. So that lower lumbar, which is where 90% of back injuries are, and mostly on the trail side, it can't really move that much. So allowing it to be able to do this with our clients, and not all of them, but probably most of the ones that we teach at the club, and being able to get them to do these things, it allows them to get the depth of the hand path in a place that, to me, the hand path is more important than the plane. Because we'd seen guys come this way and come over, and we'd seen guys go this way and come under. I mean, there's definitely a plane at impact, but that's because everything acting on the club and that's not something I really look at as something I think is a key to good ball striking, because I've just seen so many different directions of a club moving. Okay? So as far as from a spine standpoint, How many of our clients at the local clubs have enough thoracic rotation? How many of them have a rib cage and diaphragm that moves properly? So I think going down that road of kind of physiology and spending some time with chiros and osteos, and the good ones anyways, just to find out more about that, these are all things that help them generate not just power, but also it allows them to get the face square through impact, because they're able to get into ranges of motion that allow that to occur more. My friend Jeff Smith, he's brilliant. He's on Instagram at Radar Golf Pro, and I think this guy's really smart, really sharp. I've learned a lot from him in the last 7 years. He doesn't believe that impact's a moment of truth. I don't know if he coined the phrase or if he heard it somewhere else, but he believes the moment of truth is in the transition, because really impact's 2/100ths of a second away. Once the hands get to here, you can't really apply a force or torque to the club anyhow. So when a player says they saved it, they didn't save it there. They start saving it back here somewhere. He's got great stuff. The nice thing about him is he just gives it away, which is super cool. It's not like you got to do this and do that. The neck has to rotate, has to flex and extend. The shoulder in really, really good golf swings. When we see Sergio go to the top, or we see Ricky Fowler, and these guys look like they come down and they're stuck, but then they're not. The ability to get that shoulder into internal rotation with that scapula being retracted is so big. It's so important. But most people we coach cannot do that. So there's nothing wrong with, if you look at George Gankis, who's a Cali teacher from LA here, a lot of his kids stand the shaft up. They go up into big internal rotation, and from there they kind of squat on the right side, keep everything level, and get the club to sling in. It's not for everybody, but it works. It makes the ball go far. I know that. That's without a doubt. That I give him credit for that. I've never seen anyone swing 6 irons at 107 miles an hour. But people look at it and they go, well, that's different, so he's wrong. Rather than taking the time to go, what's in that? What's in that? It's definitely, knowing George for a long time has helped me with a couple kids who came, and they're quite funky. I've taken kids who looked perfect and made them across the line because how hard they go this way in transition. So if they're kind of in line already and they go this way even more, they're going to hit it that way all the time. So I never thought I'd get to a point 20 years ago that I was going to get someone to be more across the line. I have time for one more question. Yes, sir.
Chris, thank you. And I might have missed it, but it sounded like you started a list and you said the first thing is to do no harm.
Yeah.
Did I miss?
Yeah, I'm not. If you probably figured it out by now. I'm not good at lists. Right. When I go grocery shopping for my wife, she talks to me as I'm walking through the thing, because I'll have 5 things on a list. I'll come home with 32 other things. But there wasn't much of a list. I just didn't want to forget the names of the people who influenced me. But I feel like I do this every day of my life for 20 years. If I have to write it all down, I probably don't understand it, well enough yet. Some people, they use the things the way they do, but for me, it's just, this is a great opportunity to get who I am, what I believe in. Everyone making a living doing this, I'm your biggest supporter, and I just want to. I want to continue to grow the game and continue to grow my understanding of it, because, it doesn't seem like much, but for some people, when they start to hit the ball better and they realize they're not useless, it's a big thing. Like it shouldn't be. Eating is a big thing. Like having a house over your head's a big thing, but it's important to kind of help people through that. And I think helping yourself first and being vulnerable and putting yourself out there, it's intimidating the direction golf instruction is going in, because it's so thoughtful and heady, and it's like, if you don't understand it, then you don't understand it. And so we all struggle with that. It's really easy just to go and keep saying the same thing all the time, but I don't think that's the best way forward. So thank you for attending. It's really special for me, one, having Greg here and being in Southern California, which is the first time I read a golf ball. So it's pretty cool to be here now. Doing this for sure. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, clearly one of the brightest minds in our game, and we're really pleased and lucky to have you here for the couple days, Sean, so thank you.
Thank you very much.